Today, we are digging into a book that honestly kicked off a whole movement, Jack Herer's The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And this book is basically a fiery investigation that asks one simple question. But oh boy, is the answer complicated.
So let's just jump right in. How on earth did hemp, a plant that literally helped build civilizations, end up as public enemy number one? Hearst's book argues this wasn't some accident. He says it was a deliberate plot, and that is the mystery we're going to try and unpack today.
You know, the first thing you have to wrap your head around is this massive contradiction. For thousands of years, this plant was a total workhorse for industry. I mean, everything from the sails on ships to the paper in our books. But now, it's treated like a major threat. You see this wild switch right here, from a historical staple to a modern menace. So to figure out how this happened, we gotta go back. Like, way back.
So let's start right there with the history. We're about to step into what Jack Herer calls a forgotten golden age, a time when hemp was, and I'm not exaggerating here, one of the most important plants on the entire planet.
The scale of this history is just staggering. Think about it. The first woven fabric ever known from around 8000 BCE? Yep, made of hemp. The drafts of the Declaration of Independence? Written on hemp paper. And get this, in the mid-1800s, cannabis was one of the most prescribed medicines in the United States. This stuff wasn't on the fringe. It was completely fundamental to society. And then, 1937 happened, and everything changed.
And just listen to who was singing its praises. This isn't some fringe activist. We're talking about George Washington, telling his groundskeeper to plant hemp everywhere. He and a lot of the other founding fathers knew just how critical this plant was for the new nation, for its economy, and its independence.
And it was just everywhere. I mean, the word canvas literally comes from the word cannabis. The great masters, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, they painted on it. Our ships were rigged with it. For decades, huge companies like Eli Lilly were selling cannabis extracts as totally mainstream medicine. It was woven into the very fabric of society. So, if it was so darn useful, why was it banned? Well, according to Herer, this is where the story takes a dark turn.
The answer, Herder argues, lies in the 1930s. This was the moment hemp was about to have this huge technological comeback, a comeback that made it a serious threat to some very, very powerful industries.
Check this out. In 1938, Popular Mechanics magazine ran a story calling hemp the new billion-dollar crop. Now, you have to remember, back then, $1 billion was an absolutely insane amount of money. They were basically forecasting a complete industrial revolution, all powered by this one plant.
So what kicked this all off? Technology. A brand new machine called the decorticator suddenly made it super cheap and easy to process hemp. All of a sudden, hemp wasn't just useful, it was a super cheap commodity that could potentially replace wood pulp for paper and even petrochemicals for plastics. And this is when some very powerful people started to pay attention.
And this wasn't some wild claim from an activist, okay? This came from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. A report from way back in 1916 said that a single acre of hemp could produce as much paper as over 4 acres of trees. Now just imagine for a second that you're in the timber business. How do you see that statistic? Not as a great opportunity, right? You see it as an existential threat.
And that right there brings us to the explosive core of this book. Here's theory of a deliberate, calculated conspiracy to kill the hemp industry, all for the sake of profit.
So Herder basically lays out the players like this. On one side, you have this up-and-coming hemp industry. On the other side, well, you've got industrial titans. People like William Randolph Hearst, who owned huge forests to supply his newspaper empire with paper. And then you have DuPont, which was going all in on new synthetic stuff like nylon and plastics, financed by one of the richest men alive, Andrew Mellon. Herder argues these guys saw hemp not just as a competitor, but as the competition that had to be wiped out.
So how'd they pull it off? According to the book, it was a brilliant and frankly sinister little trick. They just stopped calling it hemp. Instead, they started using this obscure Mexican slang term, marijuana. It was a genius move, really, because it completely confused the public and even lawmakers who had no clue they were banning a plant that farmers grew in their fields. They thought they were banning some scary, new foreign drug.
And this is the man who led the charge, Harry J. Anslinger. This is what he actually told Congress. He didn't argue that hemp was an economic threat. No. He argued that marijuana was a public menace that led directly to violence and insanity.
This was the alleged playbook.
Here shows how Anslinger and the Hearst newspapers launched this massive smear campaign. They used racist headlines to tie the drug to Mexican immigrants and Black Americans. They claimed it was the reason for degenerate jazz music. They flooded the papers with wild, made-up stories of marijuana-crazed crimes. And with all that propaganda swirling around, they snuck the Marijuana Tax Act through Congress and just like that, effectively outlawed the entire plant.
Which brings us to the central metaphor of the whole book. It's all about perception, about power, and about a truth that Herter says has been hiding in plain sight this whole time.
The title says it all, doesn't it? For Jack Harrer, all the official reasons for banning hemp, they're the emperor's invisible clothes. Everyone pretends to see them. Everyone goes along with the story. But he wants you, the reader, to be like that little kid in the crowd who finally just says what they see. There's nothing there. The justification, he claims, is a complete fabrication.
And that really leaves us with this one big question. This book is about so much more than just a plant. It's a story about who gets to write history. It argues that this incredible story of innovation and potential was deliberately erased and replaced with a story of fear and racism. And it forces us to ask, what's the cost of that? Not just for an industry, but for all of us. So what do your own eyes see?